Thank you so much for your time once again. I'm really excited for the interview.
I have been the last over a decade now, 13 years in politics.
Lots of people like me don't really know that much about how India, even though it's such a huge democracy, how it really works.
I still believe caste is something that gets left by the wayside. I think giving prescriptions of how the education system should work at the primary level in India, there is nothing better than the political realm.
Yeah. Okay. So, like I mentioned, firstly, yes, thank you so much for your time once again. I'm really excited for the interview.
Go ahead, Sammy. So shoot.
Okay. So first, could we get a little introduction about you? You know who you are.
I am working with the principal opposition party, political party in India, which is the Indian National Congress. I hold a position of a national and also a working president of the Tamil Nadu state unit of the Indian National Congress. So those are my political identities. Those are primary identities. I have spent the last over a decade now, 13 years in politics. Before that, I was a professional and I'm an engineer and a business school grad. And I mean, up till the age of 32, I had nothing to do with politics. But, various members in my family and generations before have been in politics. So it's not like, as a family, we've had an association, but personally, I had nothing to do with it up to 13 years ago. In the last 13 years, I've been through a, pretty long journey of getting where I am today in the Indian National Congress.
Okay. And who or what really made you want to be a politician?
It's a good question because it wasn't something that I wanted to do since I was, let's say, your age or something. I would very different ambitions or very different aims or goals in life. I think somewhere when I was around the age of 30 or 31, I always had this sort of feeling of that I wanted to do something for my country. I had this desire to serve. You could say it could come in some way or form from having grown up in an environment where that's where most of the conversations were about, like, about how we can make changes to this policy or that policy in the governance of India. So even though at that particular point I didn't pay attention, almost, growing up hearing it, maybe somewhere it made an impression on me. So around that age is when I decided to move back to India. At that point, I wasn't in India. I was working in Microsoft in the US, and I quit my job and said that, it's either now or never. So I need to go down and pursue what I really wanted to do in my life. There was also a catalyst because, this is something that I had been feeling for a while. I remember one of the catalysts was a piece of legislation that had come out at that point in time called the Right to Education. So in that Right to Education legislation, just out of interest, I read it and, inspired me to come back to India to try and make that sort of impact, because that really made a big difference to primary education in our country when we came out with that legislation. And that's one area that I'm also very interested and passionate about. So that, what occurred to me at that point in time is if I could make one transformative, because India is so large and it's so complex, and governance also is complex, that if I could make one single piece of lasting change that would impact so many of my countrymen, it would be worth the journey, which is then why I came back and started on the journey.
Wow, that's really nice. So, how is a normal day at the job for you like?
So I don't spend all my time in politics, mostly because I'm not an elected representative yet, which means I'm not either a councillor or a member of any legislative assembly or a member of parliament. I have different concentrated time that I've had to spend, which is in managing other people's elections or running my own campaign or, protesting against any, state government or national government's policies that we're against. And of course, every day about an hour, I go on TV, or half an hour I go on TV, and we have these debates where I put forward what my party's position is, and the ruling government or other parties put forward their position. That's about the time I spend these days mostly in politics. They've been like months, or they've been like extended period of time, and I've had to do one of the things I mentioned earlier, which was run someone's election, manage my own election, protest, agitations, public meetings, which mostly are, if you want to break it up into themes, it's basically on the ground work around disseminating information. Like right now you're recording me and you're going to put this video somewhere online. So you're going to spread the message via the digital medium online, right? So much of India still wants you to come down and face them and give you that message in person, which is why you'll see, you'll probably wonder why politicians have these huge road shows or public meetings, because we still have a large section of our society that even though they receive information in other ways, there is a huge impact on their psyche or their mind if we give them information in this format that they used to for generations.
Nice. Okay. And how does the Indian political system work? And, I know lots of people like me don't really know that much about how, India, even though it's such a huge democracy, how it really works.
That's a very big question. So, how would you want me to spread it up in terms of how our system of government is, how our system of elections work, or do you want the informal answer that, I mean, if you phrase it in the sense that, let's say tomorrow, Sammy, you want to become a politician, what is
Right.
the journey that you would undertake? Is that the kind of question you're asking?
More, I think if you could just talk about, how the government is structured.
Okay, so we have what's called a Westminster form of parliamentary democracy, which means that individuals get elected as members of an assembly. That assembly at the national level is the parliament. They have a parliamentary constituency, and then the prime minister is actually supposed to be elected from those individuals.
Okay.
So it's sort of an indirect election of the prime minister. Like if you compare it to the American system, the American system is a presidential system where you have one person who says, I want to lead the country, and then you have actually a presidential contest. And there it's really just two parties, just like even Britain has boiled down to, even though you have a third or fourth party now growing in Britain, but mainly two parties. In India, you have a number of parties
Right.
representing, representing in a lot of ways the diversity that is unique to our country, different languages, cultures, religions, completely different sets of, what do you say, priorities. And sometimes, so if parties choose, then you have multiple parties representing them, each one puts up their candidates. And then right now, for example, if you look at how our government is structured, you have a prime minister from one party that has a, let's say 200 plus members of parliament, but he's also getting support from other parties so that he can cross what's called the halfway mark in parliament. So there is
Okay.
a certain number of seats in parliament. You have to reach the halfway mark to be able to form government. Right?
Okay.
So we have three tiers of government in this country. One is the parliament, right? Then you have individual state governments, and then you have what's the local governments. So which means, what a panchayat is, or a
Yeah, a
village
village
local body.
leader.
So village leader, right? So you have elections for that as well. So like a
Okay.
city is split up for administrative purpose into wards, so that each ward would also have a representative, a public representative. So therefore you have local body, you have the state assembly, and you have parliament. These are the three tiers of government, if you will.
Okay.
And they all are supposed to work together to deliver services to the individual. Sometimes the lines get blurred. Like if you're a member of parliament, your actual job is supposed to be to represent the voice of your people in that highest lawmaking body of this country. So parliament
Okay.
makes laws that affect you and me, right? So
Yeah.
when, like, for example, parliament will make a call on changing criminal laws like they just did a few days ago. And that will really impact you if you ever read it or you try to read some of these legislations coming out. You'll be able to realize how it impacts your life. The state government also makes laws. So there are
Okay.
now, I'm sort of going back, but basically, the constitution of our country has subjects that are mainly in the domain of the state. That means there's certain things that only the state government can take a call on. Right? There's some that are in the domain of the center, and some that both can. Right? There's some
Okay.
subjects that both can interfere or both can make legislations on, make laws on. So essentially, but these three tiers work together. They work together to ensure that we deliver services to the citizen. That's the primary form of government. Of course, there are various branches also, right? So this is the elected form of government. You have the
Right.
bureaucracy. So you have people who pass the IAS exam, which is the central bureaucracy, or in every state also they have a public service commission that they pass those exams and start working for the government. And these are the execution arm of the government. So they are the ones who actually make sure the stuff gets done on the ground, right? The
Okay.
politicians are actually people who will make the laws and then push, I mean, hypothetically or theoretically rather, push the executive to make sure the job gets done. So these are the two branches that are important in the government. Of course, the opposition is also a very important part. It's not part of government, but it's supposed to hold the government to account. If the government makes a mistake or comes up with some legislation that they believe is wrong for the people, it's the opposition's job to hold them to account on that, to protest it, to vote on it, to bring any number of measures that are actually there to enable the government, or rather put the government on the mat and make them take a step back if possible. The people of our country also have done this in the past. So I don't know if you remember, Sammy, farmers were agitating for many, many months outside Delhi, right? That was against the government modifying the earlier laws and bringing in new farm laws that
Oh,
farmers in Punjab, Haryana, and some regions around were very angry about. So when the government just sort of brought it unilaterally, without even listening to the opposition, because they had a brute majority in parliament, they could just pass any bill they wanted to. The
oh,
people of the country who were most affected came and sat on protest. And they sat on it for so long that the government finally had to back down and take it back. So that also has been happening quite often in the last 5 years, I would say.
okay. And then, what is your favorite part of your line of work?
Whenever I can, if I can make an impact on the lives of people, that's what gives me satisfaction. So if I can solve a problem that is solvable by government mostly, that is what really gives me satisfaction. Not the debates I go on, or the posturing or anything of that sort. It's really if you can make even the smallest impact. Sometimes it's got nothing to do with government also, but fundamentally that's what gives me a sense of satisfaction.
Wow, that's really nice. And then, what are some challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis as a politician?
Some of the biggest challenges are that there are various different forms of our, or the various pillars of our democracy aren't necessarily independent as they were envisioned to be. So, for example, media is supposed to be one of the pillars of our democracy, right? In fact, the media, whether it is television, print, journalists as a whole, are supposed to actually ask questions of the government. But
Right.
what we have now, we're in a situation where most journalists are very pliable towards the government and they keep asking the opposition questions, in fact. So
Okay.
there's this compromised sense of their duty. Their duty is to hold the government to account. So that's frustrating sometimes when people, very purposely are partisan. They sit on one side. They're supposed to be objective, and they're supposed to hold the government to account. Similarly, the other arms of our democracy, the other pillars, whether it's the judiciary or whether it is the election commission, whether it is the manner in which I think power that vests in the government is being abused to compromise or make put other institutions in more compromising positions, is something that's quite frustrating from time to time. This is on the larger sense. On the more micro sense, personally, I would say it is frustrating at times to see how political parties take decisions. Those decisions are not based on very transparent mechanisms. Those decisions are not based on risk reward ratios, or not on effort and outcome basis. Like, it's not necessary that those who put in more effort will achieve their desired outcome in politics. It's a very sort of undefined passage or pathway to elevation or to mobility in politics, I would say. And that has been quite frustrating for me personally.
Okay. And what are the educational qualifications that you need to be a politician?
None. None at all.
Wow.
Anybody can be a politician. Anybody can be. So I think that's also beauty of our democracy in a lot of ways. There have been some great, great politicians who didn't even pass out of school. And then there have been some, extremely educated politicians who made some extremely wrong decisions for the country as well.
Yeah.
So I think by and large, a politician is supposed to be a reflection of society, right? As our society, it is up to our society whether they want to reject people who don't have a certain educational qualification, or they believe it does not matter. And so far, they have shown by and large that it does not matter to them. So we are, as they say in a representative democracy, a mere reflection of the public of India who are voting. Therefore, as it stands today, there is no preference for mostly, and also there is no legal requirement to have any minimum education qualification.
Okay. And what is something that you may have been scared of before joining your current profession, but maybe are less scared of to like apprehend? Maybe something like public speaking.
Sure, I think public speaking is a very important skill, very, very important. And I I don't think I was scared of or apprehensive of anything before I got into the profession. Maybe I wouldn't have taken the leap I did if I was. Maybe I'm a bit of a eternal optimist, if you will, that everything will work out. But
Yeah.
very much so, once I entered the profession, one challenge was public speaking. ensuring that basically you're able to communicate your message in a manner that is relatable, without fear also, obviously, so you're not choking up when you're speaking, etc. The other things are also, like I said, one of the things about politics versus any other line or profession or what have you choose, is that there is a realm of ambiguity. The size of what can go wrong and is not in your control, or realm of control also, as much as ambiguity, is so large that
Right.
you might not have really anything in your control no matter what you do. You can't dictate what the outcome is. Like, for example, you will go and study for an exam. If you study well, mostly you should do well in your exam. Correct? That's the general,
Right.
right? If you're running a business, assuming the economy doesn't go to hell and everything goes bad, you'll end up doing, you work hard at it, you make, basic decisions well, you'll end up there. But in politics, you could do all of this. You could work forever. You could put in all your effort. You could use all your brains. You could do whatever you want. You could still end up nowhere. It
Yeah.
happens so much outside your realm of control. And there is so much ambiguity when you're taking any decision, because you have so little information, that even though, now you have consultants in politics who come and give you data about what the public thinks, etc., etc., you still would
Right.
have no idea what the outcome is going to be. So that's the one
Yeah.
part that would be very scary. And if you're not comfortable dealing with ambiguity, it would be the worst profession to be in.
Right. Because no matter how much you prepare, something unexpected could always happen.
Yes. More often than not, that's what happens.
Yeah. So, what impact does your profession make on the world? And I know politics makes a huge impact. So,
I mean, yeah, overall, I mean, basically, politicians make laws that, change societies. They can make good decisions or bad decisions, both of which could take an entire country of people on the wrong or right path. In
right.
some ways, ever since most of the world has embraced free market economics, the involvement of government, you could say, has become lesser on the lives of people. But that's mostly in countries where people have already reached let's say, a minimum basic quality of life, that they have a home, they're able to get a decent job, that there's good healthcare, there's good education, right? There's uninterrupted power, there is piped water to your house. All these things are still challenges for a huge majority of our population in India. And educating them, making sure they get adequate healthcare, making sure they are equipped to live a decent quality of life, is, if anything, a politician is in the politicians' hands. It's in the people who are making laws of our government, or even executing those laws in terms of the bureaucracy. It changes. You can change lives by your decision. So be hugely impactful, I would say. Of course,
Yeah.
many people actually tend to think sometimes that when you've reached that minimum quality of life, or when you've gone beyond that. So, Sammy, for example, you or my son or your dad, right? When
Right.
you've reached beyond, you've got those basics handled and taken care of, politics won't affect your life. But that's also untrue. Even in the business environment, there is a huge impact that the decisions that politicians make have on that environment. It makes a difference to investors, whether they want to invest in a country, if it's peaceful, if there is
Mhm.
harmony, if there is generally a business friendly approach of the government, because the government can tax you to hell, the government can put
Yeah.
onerous provisions on the business that doesn't make it viable. So all these things also, I mean, if you take it 35 years ago or 40 years ago, it used to make a big difference. Now it makes lesser of a difference, but it still is very, very important. In
Right.
the government's job in creating an enabling environment, so that even people like your dad or me, for example, could live a good life or be happy about the direction that we are going in or our families are going in, would be influenced by government.
Yeah. Okay. And who are the different professions outside politics that you have to work with as part of your job?
Everybody, right? In the sense, not my job in the sense that I'm not a public representative yet, but for the ones who are, right, ones who are working 24 by 7 in politics, they would be, you'd have to work with every member of society, because you're
Right.
their voice, right? So if a doctor comes in and says there's a problem in this clinic there or there, or if you're talking about different organs of government, You actually have to work with the panchayat president, you have to work with the legislative assembly representative, the MLA, you have to work with the bureaucrats, whether it's the collector, the VAO, the Tahsildar, all levels. Because the second you become a representative, you've opened your doors to hearing from everybody. So even
Yes.
if there's a problem that you can't make much of an impact on, I mean, funny to hear this, but even for a family dispute, let's say, two people in a family are having a dispute, they might come to you because they see you as someone who's senior in that, in the region that they belong to, and you can't say no to that either. It's something that you will try and fix. So
Right.
a certain portion of the job requires you to be a firefighter doing everything.
Yeah. And how do you get ready for the elections, especially the national elections that took place recently?
See, there are a lot of things. On one side, there are ensuring one that you are a known face. Even though, frankly, our elections have become a lot more recently about one presidential face, even though it's a parliamentary democracy. You see, where when I was taking you to earlier saying that the US, there's a presidential contest, even though we don't have a presidential system here, more and more what's been happening over the years is that it is boiling down into a contest between two people or one person and two, three options on the other side. So the individual candidate's popularity, his name, the work he's done in his constituency, all of that has started to matter less. But I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all. It definitely does. So, in order to get ready for elections as a whole versus your own personal election, if it's your own personal election, you should have, by the time elections come around, and if you say, I'm going to get ready now, it's too late. You have,
Yeah.
it will take you at least about 3 to 4 years minimum to start being known in the constituency as someone who's helping people, who's doing good work, who's someone who's dealing with people's problems. But fundamentally, the first thing is you go and you look for problems to solve, and it's problems to solve that are solvable by the government but are being ignored by the government at that time, because there's so
Okay.
many problems and so many different interests and so many different motivations of people, right? So oftentimes what happens is important issues, arguably important issues, get ignored. So you go find those issues, you go and lobby the government for them, you go and do maybe protest against the government if they're not listening to you, and you become known as a person who cares about society at large in that constituency and is going to be able to move forward there. There are also other methods people use more and more. What's happened over time is, and this is because you're a kid born and raised in a city, I don't know if you're very familiar with the concept of caste. But caste is something that's still very alive and well in this country. And so
Right.
if you go to a particular constituency and you say, I'm going to start election, the people who might come and support you first are people who identify with which caste you belong to, and
Oh,
it's for no other reason except that they find a sense of kinship with you that they wouldn't with other people, especially if you're coming in as an outsider, right? And so you have to build out of there. Like, you must have a beachhead. So if you're preparing for an exam, Sam, you have four different types of questions, right? Let's say maths, geometry, algebra, etc., etc. You'll say, okay, I'm going to make sure I get 100 out of 100 in algebra, for example, because I do really well in algebra, right?
right.
So at least I will get that section, 100%. And
Nailed
maybe
it.
I'll go 50% here, 60% there. So a lot of elections also is like that. You say, okay, I have these number of people. This is my vote bank. My caste, let's say, or people who are favorable towards me for whatever reason, caste may be one reason. I'll make
Yeah.
sure I get all the votes. And then I'll get 20% of those people, 30% of those people. And that's how I will get enough votes to become a representative.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of analysis and math that goes into that as well. But by and large, I still believe caste is something that gets left by the wayside. I think it only comes in the end. Again, this depends on which part of India you're talking about, because it varies based on which part. But by and large, if you go in with the sense of wanting to do good work for the people will appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. And how is politics evolving with new technology, media, and the behaviors of people? Like nowadays with AI and everything, all the professions are changing.
In some ways, yes, I think AI, I think the only applicability I've seen of AI in politics so far has been, well, positive and negative. The Prime Minister used a real-time translator online to translate his speeches from Hindi to Tamil. I saw that recently. So that's a productive use of, machine learning. On the negative side, you have all these deep fakes now, which are
Yeah.
AI, and that you could have me saying something or somebody else more prolific saying something that they've never said at all, but you won't be able to make out also in that video if it's actually a fake video or real video. So this leads to a lot of problems, because if you can start spreading false news, you can change the outcome of an election. And someone would get elected on completely false promises, false pretenses, actually, rather. And so that's
Mm.
part of the problem. That's maybe one of the bad things that's happening because of the the prevalence of AI or machine learning. The other thing is, in terms of data analysis, in terms of trying to understand how, I haven't seen much applicability yet in terms of decision making for a politician.
Okay.
Whether he should focus in campaigning on one particular way or the other. I haven't seen AI play any central role in that space yet. So I'm sure it will come at some point. But you know what they say, right? AI, even in the professional sphere, isn't necessarily taking away jobs per se, but it's changing the kind of jobs that you would require. So you still need to be able to know how to prompt any intelligent engine to be able to get the answers you're looking for, right? So
Right.
it is an enabler more than anything else. And I think in politics, it'll enable a lot of different ways to make decisions. Even before AI, the government has never been great at data-driven making decisions. That, I
Okay.
think, is something that is a slow evolution that's happening. In fact, going back to the first piece of legislation I read, which I have mentioned as my motivation to come, I thought it was flawed in some ways, because they were giving prescriptions of how the education system should work at the primary level in India, and there was no feedback loop in there that they had established. So there was no, we'll do this, we'll measure, and we'll see if we're doing a good job or not, so we can change it. It was just that this is the decision, go ahead and do it. We don't care what the outcomes are. So it's very important, right? That's what data driven decision making is. And I think that's lacking at many levels in government. So once we get to making decisions that way, then we can think of, okay, how AI would help us crunching more data and making better decisions.
Okay. And what are the ways that younger people could somehow, in even a small way, get involved with the political system?
I think there are a few things younger people can do. Depends on how young, of course, but by and large, be more aware of what laws are being made in government. First, I
Right.
think start reading the news. That itself, I think, is the first step for all young people, because I don't find any young people watching or reading the news. So be more
Mhm.
aware of what's happening. The second step would be, one of the advantages young people have today over, let's say, what me or your dad had back in the day, was the ability to disseminate information amongst your peer groups, whether that's through social media, right? Or even through the digital devices that are in your hands now, is so much higher that you could organize protests, or you could even organize an online petition if you want to see change in something. And there is no government that would not take what overwhelmingly young people say about things. Being able to organize yourselves in, let's say, in pursuit of any particular cause, whether that might be a change in some of the laws the government is talking about, or a change in civic communities that you find you're passionate about, fixing a pothole in front of your house, let's say, for example, right? How would you go about it? If you start to ask these questions, find the people who are responsible for it, then organize your community to actually petition those people, that would be great. One of the things that one problem with India, I think one large problem with India, is that there's something in economics called the tragedy of commons, which basically means that common infrastructure, the road outside your house, it doesn't belong to you, right? You clean your house, you make sure your house is not dirty, you make sure your house doesn't, your floor is not cracked, or there's not something physically wrong. But you drive onto a road that is basically badly damaged, and you just take it for granted that there's nothing you can do about it. And beyond the point, you're not going to spend money on it. Also, you won't spend any money on it because it's not yours. So that common facility gets disregarded. Actually, the government's job to make sure that you have good roads, because you're paying taxes for it. But clearly the government isn't doing their job, right? So who's going to hold them to account? One of the ways citizens hold governments to account is by voting them in or out of power. But I think that doesn't end there. I think it has to be beyond that, which is you have to start raising your voice more as citizens and saying that we demand this. So just that pothole example, one simple thing. There's a pothole outside your house and it bothers you every time, right? I mean, it fills up with water. It causes issues in traffic. So you want to get it fixed. How would you go about getting it fixed with the government? Be less shy about trying and raising your voice for the causes that matter to you. Let's not take for granted that these things will always be the case in India. And I think young people can do that.
Okay. And, that's something really great to hear. And, I hope I can also do something like that and take an initiative of my own.
I hope so. That would be great.
Right. And these days, many non politicians, maybe social media influencers or celebrities, are involved in voting or encouraging people to vote. And one example that I saw recently on the news is of Taylor Swift, who encouraged more than 35,000 American voters to register. So, how do these people help US politicians if they do at all?
I think in terms of bipartisan encouragement of getting the vote out, like getting more people to vote, deepening their participation in democracy, celebrities hold huge sway, much more than the politicians themselves, because unfortunately, as time has passed, I think politicians have a lot of politics as a whole, and maybe the profession of politicians has lost credibility. So ordinarily, you could have five big political leaders come out and say, guys, register and vote, right? And that should have more of an impact than Taylor Swift doing it. But Taylor Swift and her opinion on matters, of course, Taylor Swift is a phenomenon now. She's like huge. So maybe she's an exception to the rule in a way. But any celebrity,
Right.
I would say, has an ability to get people to do things in other phases of their life, other areas of their life rather. So it's about asking more people to register to vote. I think that's great. There are a lot of influencers that also influence how people vote, uh, which I think, in a democracy, everyone's entitled to that. There's nothing wrong with it. I actually would say that's great because they're disintermediating any mainline supply of information like broadcast news, etc. If they're telling people, giving them true facts, if they're asking them to vote based on that, on giving those true pieces of information, then yeah, it's very good, and they're very powerful now. In the Indian election, if you go read about Dhruv Rathi and his impact, he's this young man who's sitting overseas, who keeps putting out YouTube videos about situations and debunking myths and informing the public of what actually happened in a particular situation, that then influences their mind as to whether they should vote for the government or against the government of the day. So there are now influences like this in not this is more famous because the largest speaking population of our country speaks in Hindi and Dhruv Rathi does it in Hindi, but there are people who speak in various regional languages now on YouTube, and younger people have started to absorb information more from YouTube than they do from your traditional news channels. So therefore these people have a huge impact now, I think, in elections.
Right. And, I think I've also seen lots of people, they're like, oh, something to do with, Biden or someone. And then lots of people then start voting for that particular party, just like you said, because of the celebrity's opinion too.
Yes, yes.
So, last and finally, what is one message that you would like to share to everyone listening?
To everyone who's listening, with the purpose of deciding whether they want to be a politician or not, whether they want to do something in the field of government or not, I would say that politics is, like I said, if you are not familiar with or comfortable rather with ambiguity and not comfortable with a lack of control, then this isn't the right profession for you. For those who want to do something for India, I think there is however, no other profession that I know of that could make a bigger impact on the future of our country than the profession of politics. And I say this, as someone who was an entrepreneur before, and I do believe with all my heart that entrepreneurs, people who start businesses, employ people, solve problems, are really the backbone of our country in a lot of ways. But in terms of impacting the lives of the maximum number of people you can in your country, there is nothing better than the political realm if you can deal with the ambiguity that comes with it. The other thing I would say is that do not enter politics if at any point your goal in life is to make more money, because there are enough people in politics like that, and the country doesn't need more of those. Yes, there is a certain sizable amount of resources that you would to have before you even consider contesting an election, and it's very unfortunate, but that's the truth today. However, we've seen people overcome that handicap by accumulating public support without any resources also. So it's not that that's impossible, but definitely if money is your goal, because there are people, it's nothing wrong with that. What is your inherent motivation? Is it to make more money, buy a bigger house, buy a bigger car, build a large corporation? All these things you should, if you have these, don't come to politics. If you're, in a sense, your motivation is you want to impact the lives of the basic quality of life of the people of your country, I think politics gives you the way to do it at a scale that no other profession will. So that's when you should enter politics.
Okay, and I think that's all. So thank you so much for your time today. It's
My
been really
pleasure. Thank you.
insightful. Yeah.
Thank you, Sami.